So we've got quite an exciting evening, I think. I get kind of excited about this topic. Um, I actually got quite passionate about fermenting foods because I'm always looking at like old world ways that they used to do things, traditional things. I think there's so much in our history that we oftentimes, think all the modern stuff is so great. But I like to kind of look back and blend the old with the new, the science with the tradition. And so I'm very excited to talk about this topic today. And so I happen to have my slide set down here, and I'm sure somebody will be switching it up there. So we can go to the next slide. Just a little bit of background about myself. I've got a degree in biology from St. Thomas University, and I got my master's when I was older, went back to school in my 40s, and I went to Hawthorne University and got my degree, my master's degree in health and nutrition education. And as I was doing that, you had to pick a project that you wanted to really dive into deep and do a thesis on. And I decided to do, this was probably, 2008, 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. And I decided to do it on fermentation of vegetables and the health benefits because I didn't really know anything about it. I knew sauerkraut was good for you, but I had no idea there was this whole world out there. However, today it's very, very popular. Now, in 2022, it's like pretty commonplace. People know what kombucha is. People know what maybe beet kvass is. Back then, it was very few and far between that knew about it. And so I should have brought it with. I have my thesis. It's about that thick. My teacher said you should have just written a book on it. And I said, well, I wanted to, but you just run out of time for all that stuff. However, it really opened up my eye how important the eating good foods are and really keeping the traditions alive. And prior to that, I studied herbal medicine. Got into it because of a family issue. Our youngest daughter, Clara, when she was 4, she was sick, and the doctors couldn't help us, and so we needed some outside source, and so that's why I went into herbal medicine and just got totally fascinated with how incredible it was. And then in 2005, I started my clinical practice, seeing clients and just helping different people, and things just got pretty busy. I first started seeing people out of my home, and pretty soon my husband finally said, you know what, I can't even sit down in the living room and just relax because there's people coming in and out of here all the time. And so we decided to build a new place for our shop that we already had and expanded it. So in 2010, and we can look at the next slide, and that shows you what our shop looks like in case some of you haven't been out there. And so we have a lot of things in our wellness center, our store, our farm store and wellness center. Please come and visit us anytime. We are open 6 days a week, and we're here to help everybody, so stop in and see what we have. We also have like a wellness center too, and you can see from this next picture, there's like a classroom area and then also a wellness center. We have a lot of different practitioners that we work with. So we have massage therapy besides the herbal medicine and nutrition that I do. We've got Reiki, we've got biomat, infrared therapy, sound therapy by Stacy, thermography from Picture My Health, Apron Mama's Doula from Hannah Malstead, and we do Ion Cleanse Detox Foot Baths by AMD. So we have a lot of different things that we are trying to empower health and wellness. And let's kind of go to the next slide. And I just want to make sure that you know I'm not a medical doctor. This is for educational purposes only. I'm not diagnosing, treating, or curing any kind of a disease. To make sure that you work with your healthcare provider if you're changing anything in your life. Okay, so we get into what are fermented foods. Now I do want to mention that I have a handout that I sent Teresa. We have about 20 copies. And then there's also copies of this on the website too. So anybody who wants a copy, you can, it's a lot of pages to it. So feel free to raise your hand. Teresa can pass out a few if you, maybe groups can kind of share so we have enough. And definitely if you need more, check out the website too. So the first thing is, what are fermented foods? Fermented foods are cultured foods that are part of really every traditional diet around the globe. And so this actually, I mean, you go to Asia, you're going to have kimchi. You go to Kazakhstan, you're going to have fermented mare's milk. You go to the Swiss Alps, and you're going to be having, natural yogurt and raw cheese and that kind of stuff. So really everywhere across the world, they use fermented foods much more than we do here in the United States. And it can be a whole range of foods, not just, what we think of yogurt and sauerkraut. We're going to learn about making fermented carrots tonight. We're going to do beet kvass. And there's just a wide array of things you can ferment. Virtually anything. I've fermented apples. I ferment cauliflower. You can do squash. Really, the sky is the limit when it comes to fermenting. And so the fermentation process that causes the production of lactic acid bacteria is really the good bacteria, and that's what creates the nice taste, the slightly sour taste, and it's what really makes you healthy, is those lactic acid bacteria. So eating traditional foods that are fermented regularly as part of your diet will really help provide optimal health, and we'll take a look at some of the things that it does in the next slide. Another really added benefit of fermenting foods is you can preserve the freshness of things you raise in the garden. And it's, here in Minnesota, our growing season seems so short, and you really need to figure out a way that you can, besides the canning and the freezing and dehydrating and everything else, fermentation is a great way to really extend the life and of the products that you raise in the garden, plus it enhances the nutrition. So this slide is going to be hard to read for you, but I'm just going to point out a few of the health benefits. And I've got them listed here. Okay, so one of the things is it's definitely helpful for digestion. So it helps increase the absorption of nutrients and bioavailability, especially like vitamin C and some of the B vitamins. People that have trouble absorbing foods they eat, and there's so many GI problems these days, fermented food is a real good way to utilize this and really absorb those nutrients. Then, interestingly, it helps synthesize nutrients like folic acid and vitamin B and vitamin K2. You need vitamin K2 so your body can absorb vitamin D. You shouldn't just take vitamin D alone. You want to make sure you always take it with vitamin K2 so it can be bioavailable for the body. Another thing it does, it increases absorption of minerals. It helps with protein digestion, so you don't have to buy digestive enzymes or buy hydrochloric acid or resort to taking the purple pill Nexium or something like that. This can help really break down your food and especially pull out the protein that you need. At the same time, it enhances calcium metabolism, which is really important for osteoporosis. So a lot of foods your body can't necessarily absorb the calcium. Let's just say broccoli, for instance. You can eat broccoli, just plain old broccoli, but unless you add a fat or something else to it, your body's probably not going to absorb all the calcium that you need. So that's why I always put a nice smothering of butter on the broccoli before I eat it, because that way I know I'm going to absorb the calcium. And the fermented foods just helps that happen too. There's research showing that fermenting of foods, of vegetables, can help with skin problems like acne, eczema, thrush. The reasoning behind this is that if there's a skin issue, you want to go back and see what's the root cause of that. And more often than not, probably 90% of the time, it's going to be some type of digestion issue. So if you can digest the foods a lot better, the skin issues go away. It helps maintain a pH balance. And we all know that more alkaline type of pH in the body is a lot healthier than too acid of a pH for the body. It keeps your pathogenic bacteria in check. So about 70% of your immune system is approximately in your GI tract, the whole thing. And so if you have a healthy gut bacteria, you're going to stay a lot healthier. Prevents and controls diarrhea or constipation. So fermented foods are really normalizing, and they'll just help the bowels get adjusted. It can alleviate lactose intolerance. A lot of people think that they have to be lactose intolerant forever, but if you can balance your gut flora, you can actually get to the point where you can tolerate lactose again. Helps with colitis, IBS, H. pylori, any type of inflammation in the intestines. It can also stimulate your immune system function. We touched on that with the good bacteria. Can reduce allergic symptoms, which is pretty interesting. This is a time of year when a lot of people react to, all of the allergens and the dusts and mold and all that stuff of the farmers doing the field work. And I see a lot of clients that have high reactions to allergies. But if you can balance your gut first, a lot of that stuff goes away. And then there are definite anti-cancer and anti-tumor effects. There's a lot of science behind that will show that. And fermented foods can also help normalize your serum cholesterol and triglycerides, and they assist with liver function and detoxification. So there's just a multitude of benefits that surround why you would want to eat fermented foods besides the interesting flavor that they have. Yeah, question. Yes, so gluten intolerance is a lot of times like an autoimmune and anti-inflammatory condition. You can bring down the gut inflammation through eating foods like this, and then oftentimes that will go away as well. So it might take a little longer than some things, but it definitely can happen. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. So just so you know, there are a ton of scientific studies out there. This particular one was from 2019, and it just confirmed what our ancestors have known. It showed that the fermented foods provide all of that listing of benefits: antioxidant, antimicrobial, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, anti-diabetic, and anti-atherosclerotic too. So that is just one of many, many studies. I'll show you one more. Here's another one, and this one was from 2018, and it just, again, just reinforces the fact that fermented food can really transform the gut, gaining all kinds of health benefits from it by changing the microbial level of the bacteria. And the other thing to keep in mind is there's a huge gut and brain connection. So there's a lot of evidence showing that people that have a gut imbalance can have more problems like with ADHD, autism, schizophrenia, dyslexia. And if you can rebalance that, you can, change that. It's something that doesn't have to be there forever. So, and there's a lot of authors out there. If you're interested in that topic, the gut-brain connection, for sure check out the books from Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. She's written some really great books on that. All right, so let's go to the next slide. And there's all kinds of foods that you can ferment, like I was saying. Think of the dairy products. So you've got yogurt, kefir, your raw cheeses, even cottage cheese. You can make creme fraiche. You can do buttermilk. So there's a whole array of dairy products. Question? Raw cheese? Okay, so cheese made from raw milk. It's not pasteurized, it hasn't been heated, so it has all of the natural enzymes and everything still in there. The protein has not been denatured, so it makes it a lot more easy to digest. So you can find a few brands of raw cheese around, and it'll say right on the package that it is raw. Then there's a whole array of vegetables, sauerkraut from cabbage, pickles, olives, kimchi, radishes. Ooh, radishes are so fun to ferment. And when in the springtime or early summer, when you get that big glut of radishes that all come in at the same time, it is just so easy to, put those in a little jar, and I can walk you through that. And they're pretty in the jar too, so that's a fun one to do. Then we have salsas. You can make your salsa regular like you would normally do with a recipe that your favorite one is, and then you can just add a little bit of starter culture to it or whey, and you can go ahead and make a fermented one that has a tang, and it's even better for you. And lots of mixed veggies, and then fruits. Don't forget about the fruits. You can make chutneys, fruit preserves, cider, vinegars. We have apple tree that's quite abundant, and I haven't done it the last year or two, but I used to just slice up apples, put some cinnamon sticks in there, and add some whey and let that ferment, and it was really delicious. Then the soybeans. The only way I would eat soybeans is if they are fermented. So you've got natto, tempeh, miso, and tamari. And then your meats you can ferment as well. There's those, the type of sausages, the salamis, and jerky, and that's a dry fermentation. That's a different step. I have not worked with that, so I'm not an expert in that category. And then your grains and bread, sourdough, porridge. By porridge, let me just give you a quick example of a mini ferment. So if you like oatmeal and you sometimes have troubles with digesting it, a lot of times this is the best way to make your grains like oatmeal or steel-cut oats. You take your bowl the night before, you have to think ahead the night before. You take it and you put it in a bowl. You have your bowl and you put your oatmeal or your steel-cut oats in there, whatever cereal you're going to have the next morning. And then you can put a little bit of an acid, which can be like the whey from yogurt or kefir, or if you want to, you can use a little bit of apple cider vinegar. And you cover it and let it sit on the counter overnight. So it's been fermenting just for, 8 hours or whenever you're sleeping. And then in the morning, it's slightly fermented. But the key to that is that fermentation process starts to pull out the phytic acid, which is it inhibits your body from absorbing things like iron and calcium. And so when you eat that oatmeal and you cook it up in the morning, it'll cook up a lot faster, for one thing, and it stays with your body. You use every single nutrient in there, and so you really don't feel hungry as fast as you would if you just made it regularly. Sometimes people will say, I don't feel hungry till 2 in the afternoon after eating oatmeal that way. No, this is good. I like the questions. Well, for the oatmeal, it's not necessarily the fermentation process, but it's breaking down the phytic acid. And that's really the key for nuts and grains and things like that. Yeah, so it's not like you're doing it so much for the bacteria in that situation. You're doing it to release the enzymes so that your body can absorb the nutrients. A lot of people don't do well with just raw nuts, and if they're soaked and then dehydrated, then their body is perfectly fine with them. So that's kind of the point that I'm getting at there. But if it was a fermented, that I was just doing it for the bacteria, then I wouldn't heat it and cook it. Yeah, so let me give you the step by step for that. So you do your half a cup of oatmeal, you cover it with water so that it's covered, and then just a dash, maybe a quarter or a half a teaspoon, just a little starter to get that going. A lot of times I'll just use vinegar because it's handy, raw apple cider vinegar because it's there. Yes, with the mother. So that's just that's the porridge thing that they're talking about. We can do that. Or I can repeat the question too. Okay, I'll do that. Good idea. All right, so then we'll get back on track here. So the sprouted grains we talked about. And then there's a ton of beverages, tons of fermented sodas. You can make your own ginger ale. You can make your own root beer. A little more complicated, but it's doable. Kombucha, and I bet a lot of people make that here. And then there's kefir fruit sodas. You can ferment really anything. One of my favorite things to do, like this time of year, as you're picking grapes and stuff, is you have some grape juice and you ferment that on the counter for a few days. And you don't really have to add anything else. Just let it sit. And it just has that fizz. It just gives you that extra little fizz. It's really fun. And then mead, wine, and of course beer. So those are some fermented foods that are traditional. So let's take a look at the equipment that you'll need. We're going to focus on vegetables tonight. So you can make it as simple or as complicated as you like. I'm kind of a simple person, so I like to keep things simple so that I can do them fast and get them done. So these are your must-haves. You'll need a jar or a crock. I primarily use jars because at this point in my life, it's just my husband and I at home. And the two of us, it takes a little while to eat all the fermented stuff. And so I just love to do the jars. I usually do the half pints or the pints versus quart jars these days because I like to keep small batches to keep it nice and fresh. And then you need the foods that you're going to ferment, and then you need some salt. Okay, salt is really important because it keeps the pH where it's at, where it needs to be, and from there, sometimes you maybe need starters for certain foods, and other foods you don't need a starter. And we'll get into details on that. Optional equipment, you can have a starter culture, And sometimes a starter culture is as easy as having another jar or another food that's already fermented, and then you just use that to some of that liquid to start it. Or it could be you take some really great quality yogurt and you strain out the liquid, like with a dish towel or cheesecloth, put it in a strainer. Like you'd have maybe a strainer and lined with a towel, and below a vessel to catch the liquid. And then you've got all of the natural whey. And that's a great starter. Somebody who can't tolerate dairy might like something else. There's also commercial starters out there. And these are really great. You're guaranteed not to fail with these guys. So there's little packets that you can buy. This one happens to be cutting edge cultures. There's cultures for health. There's a ton of different culture starters out there, and it comes in a packet with a lot of little ones inside, and that can go a really long way, and it's loaded with the good bacteria, so you cannot fail with that. And then you need some spices, and that can be anything from garlic to cayenne peppers, bay leaves, whatever. And if you're going to do sauerkraut, a pounder comes in really handy. Although in a pinch, before they actually made pounders that were easy to come by without going to every antique store in the world, I would just use a smaller jar inside a larger one and use that. But now I've got the pounder, so it's a lot easier. And then you need water. I brought some filtered water. You don't want to use water with chlorine. That will completely defeat the purpose, and it'll kill off your good bacteria. So make sure you have a good filtered water. And another option is what we call a pickle pipe. So instead of using your regular lid, you could get one of these things that will release the carbon dioxide as it ferments. So your lid won't bulge or something like that. Question? It does. It has a hole in it. Yeah, she was wondering if this had a hole in it, the pickle pipe, and it does. It's just a little X on this plastic or rubber type of device. Silicone. Yeah, it releases carbon dioxide. So your fermentation, when it's fermenting, the release of the carbon dioxide is what causes the fizz. And it gives that, that fizz that people like in sodas. And sometimes if too much of it builds up and you maybe put too much in a jar, you might have an explosion. Okay? Sometimes it can be a real mess. Like I've had, years ago, I had forgotten that I had this one jar of kombucha sitting, with a flip top, that they had that. Well, it exploded. And I actually think I had to repaint after that time. So that doesn't happen very often, but once in a while, yes. These little pickle tops, we have these at the Lamb Shoppe, but you can order them through Frontier Co-op, or you can find them online, a lot of different places. And then the other little thing that sort of comes in handy, and I didn't grab it, but there's a little glass weight, and it's probably the size of this cap, maybe a little narrower, a little thicker, and it's just made out of glass. And sometimes you put that on your product to keep everything under the brine. But a lot of times I'll just roll up a cabbage leaf or something and stick that in there. I know in the olden days people used to take rocks and just make sure that they were clean and throw it on top. You want to keep your stuff under your brine solution. Okay, so So you can see there's the little glass thing in that middle picture, and that kind of just shows everything there. So on the next slide. So if you've never eaten fermented foods in the past, you gotta be careful that you don't eat like maybe 3 cups of whatever you're eating. It'll taste really good, but don't overdo it if your body's not used to it. Especially if your bacteria are a little compromised inside your digestive system. Sometimes you can get what is known as the Herxheimer reaction. So what's going to happen is these good bacteria come into your body and they start to kill off the bad bacteria. And as the bad bacteria die off, they release toxins. So there might be, more bloating and more gassy, that kind of stuff. So just going slow. I always say begin slow. If you've never done fermented foods in the past, start off with like 1 or 2 tablespoons per meal. And I always say it's nice to do it with meals because the food that you're eating probably has some good prebiotics in there that are going to feed the probiotics. And if the prebiotics in the food are there, then the good bacteria are going to culinate a lot faster, and you're going to have the good bacteria a lot easier. So once you start out small, then build up to more amounts, like maybe a half a cup of live cultured foods and beverages. And ideally, in an ideal world, if you could eat something fermented at every meal, you would be really healthy. Like say, for breakfast, maybe you had a little kombucha or kefir or some yogurt. And then for lunch, maybe you did some fermented carrot sticks. And then at supper, and just use them like condiments. At supper, you put a 1/4 cup of some fermented sauerkraut on your plate. That is going to be probably 1,000 times better than a probiotic that's going to cost you $50 a bottle. And it's going to just replenish, all of the good bacteria a lot easier. But that's not always doable each time. And to eat that much of it, but this is the ideal world. So let's move on to the next thing and we'll dive into how to. So one of my favorite things to do is to introduce people to fermented carrots. Has anybody ever fermented carrots before? You guys have taken my classes. Yeah. But so we're going to you're going to have a chance to taste these fermented carrots. I can't remember what day we did these last week. What day was it, Claire? Friday? Thursday or Friday? So we've got several jars, and I think what we'll do, we'll wait with all the sampling till at the end. And then you can have a little fermented carrot, you can have some pickles, you can have some beet kvass, and even some sauerkraut. We brought some plates and things, and you can taste everything and see what you like. And if you eat that much, you should be fine. So it wouldn't be too much. So you'd be surprised how tasty these are, right, guys? The fermented carrots. The kids love them, everybody. I've never run across anybody who hasn't said, wow, these are good. And they're crunchy, but they're really flavorful. They're actually probably better than just a plain carrot, which already tastes good. Very, very easy to make. So here is a recipe. I'm going to start off with just a regular one, and then later we'll talk about how you can add different herbs for infusing them with medicinal herbs. So basically what you want to do is you've got your carrots, and you clean them and peel them if you want to. If they're straight out of the garden, sometimes all you need to do is just scrub them. And you cut them. I always like to cut them in like this sticks because they fit in jars like this really good, and you just kind of make it so that they will be the size so they'll go right up to that first lip. And then there's garlic in there. You got to have garlic in there because that's good for everything and it tastes wonderful. Then you've got your sea salt. We'll talk about the different kinds of salt. You can use Celtic, Himalayan, or real salt. We'll talk about those in a moment. And then you have either your whey that you've gotten from yogurt, or you can use a starter culture, whether it's a packet or something from another batch. And bay leaves are fun to put in there. They kind of work with everything. And a little bit of mustard seed, horseradish. This is just a guideline. You can totally do other spices. But you essentially cut the carrots into the strips, and then you add the different things that you want to add to it. And we can see some pictures. And then once you get to that point, I'll switch. Let's go to the next slide. So you cut and peel the carrots. Aha, do not use baby carrots because baby carrots are usually a different story. They're tumbled in the process of being made. They're tumbled and dried. Oftentimes they use chlorine bleach to kill off the bacteria because they're really processed. So I never buy baby carrots. They look good. You can just open the pack and eat them. But they probably have chlorine bleach in them that they were soaked in for a little bit to get rid of bacteria that they didn't want. So don't use baby carrots when you're fermenting. So you just cut them up. And then the next step is where you gather all the different things you want to put in here. And so each one of these carrots that we put together is a different blend of things. So now this is where the medicinal herbs come into play. So you can be really creative. I usually always like to throw in like a cayenne pepper just because I love the kick that it adds. And it's so good for you. It helps with circulation. The cayenne is known as a heart tonic, and it actually is healing for your gut. This is something that you can use to actually help heal ulcers. So if you get enough of those things on a regular basis, you probably won't come down with the issue. So besides that, we've got thyme. This was just taken from this batch we made here. We have some ginger root, star anise. That one's a really fun one. I love putting this with cauliflower. And it adds a little licorice flavor. And when you add star anise, or anise, however you prefer to say it, it also helps the fermentation process too. It works really good at making sure things get nice and bubbly. From a medicinal standpoint, I use star anise to help clear the sinuses. A lot of people who have like sinus congestion do really well with a little star anise. Now, doesn't it almost look like a sinus from how it's looking? It's interesting how plants look like what they're supposed to be beneficial for. So I found this to be really helpful, especially in the last couple of years. All right, so another thing that you can add is something called astragalus root. Has anybody ever heard of astragalus? I know some people have grown it. Yeah. So astragalus is kind of like a Chinese herb, but we can grow it here. However, it doesn't winter over the best. And the plant has to be like 3 to 5 years old before you can harvest the root. And then when you harvest the root, you can cut it. It almost reminds me of like, I was a saxophone player in school, and it reminds me of a reed, one of those woodwind instruments where you were playing that. And so that's what it reminds me of. But astragalus is amazing to be an immunomodulator. So it helps your body balance the immune system. If it's overactive, it calms it down. If it's underactive, it builds it up. And it's kind of got a sweet flavor, and it's something that you can use freely, use it as a tonic. You really can't get too much of it. It doesn't build up in your system to cause any problems. So we've got that. Bay leaves. I've mentioned that bay leaves are great. Bay leaves provide the mixture with nice tannins to keep crispness, and they have great flavor. Has anybody ever taken bay leaves and made a cup of tea with them? If you haven't, you should try it. It's a really great tasting tea. It's supportive for the kidneys. It just is all around great thing to do. Tastes really good. It's calming and relaxing at the same time. If you want to go out in your backyard and dig up some burdock root, that's a really good thing to add into the fermented foods, because it naturally will help cleanse the liver and balance that. It helps your body process fats really good, and is great for all kinds of skin issues. Burdock is another one of those really safe tonic herbs, and it's the root that you use. And then we talked about cayenne, chicory root. Now that one's going to be a little stronger flavored, so you'd want to be careful that you don't add too much of that. Cinnamon is another fun one you could do. You could add it to carrots if you wanted. You can add it to, cauliflower. Be creative depending on what kind of flavors you like. We also have cloves, coriander, dandelion roots. You can dig up some dandelion roots, scrub them off, clean them up, and stick them in there too, because then you're going to work on some liver detoxing. Question? Oh, the carrot tops. I have not. Interesting. So the comment was, have I ever used carrot tops? I have not really done. I usually give that to my chickens and stuff, so they're getting a lot of nutrition. But I would investigate that, and they're supposed to be tastier, more nutritious than the carrot itself. That's interesting. I'll have to investigate that. What else do we have here on the list? Dandelion root, dill, elderberries. You can throw elderberries into a lot of stuff. Earlier, Claire and I fermented some cauliflower and added some elderberries, and it made it this really pretty purple color, and it was really good, wasn't it? Delicious. Let's see. Garlic mustard, ginger, hawthorn berries. Hawthorn berries are a great thing you could just throw in there, and that would be good for the cardiovascular system. Very supportive, very calming and relaxing, helping any arrhythmias or just building the cardiovascular system in general. Holy basil would be another thing you could add. That's Tulsi, and that's like good for everything that ails you pretty much. Then there's horseradish. That's another one of my favorites. I like to add that to everything. Horseradish root. I usually just put a sliver in each jar, even with the pickles, something I really love to do. I just guess I like that spice. Hyssop, juniper berries, leeks, lemon balm, linden flowers. I mean, it's endless what you could do. Purslane is another one. Reishi mushroom. I brought some reishi mushroom along to show you. So here's some dried reishi mushrooms, and you just slip that in there, and then you get all the mushroom properties, which are so supportive of the immune system. Rose hips, perfect time of year to go out and pick those bright red rose hips, and you can toss those in. Those are loaded with vitamin C. We talked about star anise or anise. Sumac berries are another fun one. Tarragon and thyme, I love to put that in there. Then there's turmeric root. If you put that in, just count on everything turning orange, yellow. And then wild bergamot in place of like wild oregano. So those are just a few examples of medicinals you can put in there. So let's go to the next page, or the next slide. And let's say you don't want to gather all those medicinals. You can make it so simple and just use a pickling spice. You can buy a pre-made pickling spice, an organic one. And then this is a list of things that might be in your pickling spice. It doesn't necessarily all of them, but it is usually a combination of one of several of those ingredients. And we did do 1 jar of pickling spice. And there's usually cinnamon in there to give it some interesting flavors. So you can try that too after we get through the slides. So the next step is you just pack your jar into how you want to do it. And I usually try to squeeze as many as I can. I just keep shoving them in there till there's no room left. And a lot of times what I'll do, I'll maybe start with the garlic on the bottom and then work your way into adding other things in there. If you want to make it look really pretty, you put your leaves on the side of the jar. Don't always make it pretty. Just get it done. All right, and so here we go. These are the jars that we did before we added the water and the, I guess, the whey or the starter culture. So really be creative. Figure out which combinations of herbs and flavors that you like. Maybe keep some records so that you know next time, you know, how you can replicate it if it turns out really good. So that gives you some idea of what that looks like. And then the next slide is you add the salt. Now, these are the types of salt that you can use. You just want to make sure it's an unrefined, unprocessed salt. I like to use all of them, the Himalayan, the Celtic, or the real salt. I like all of them for different reasons. And so you add the salt in the right ratios, and we've got that in the recipes. And then a little bit of your vegetable culture starter. And there's the vegetable culture starter that I happen to use for this bunch. And then finally, step 5 is you just add water. And so you want to go right to this first ring here. If you keep going, you're going to have too much in there and you're probably going to have some leakage. So I opened up this jar a little bit earlier today just to see how they tasted, if they tasted okay. But you can see that it's right up to the, can you smell it? I can smell it already. Yeah. So that kind of gives you some idea. You don't want to go past that. So give it, just shy of an inch on top for the air to, the carbon dioxide and everything. Question? Yeah. So that's interesting. The question was if depending on what salt you use, how much do you use? Because if you're using a coarse grind, you're going to have a lot more airspace compared to a fine grind. And so that's where it comes to kind of tasting to see what you like, how salty you like it. If it's coarse grind, I'm going to put a little bit more. So the stuff that I have here. Yeah, the Celtic that I brought is a coarse grind, so I'm going to use a little bit more than I would for the Redmonds or the Himalayan if it's a fine grind. So just finding that balance that you like it. If you like it saltier or not, you kind of have to work with it. And then once you get in the groove that you like, then you stick with that. So making it in smaller batches is kind of nice because it just takes a few days to ferment. And that way you can find out what, where your preferences are. Any other questions about the different procedures? Yes. Okay, so the question is, can you use apple cider vinegar as part of the starter? No. Okay, simple answer, you don't need to. The fermentation process itself will give it that tang, like vinegary taste, as it starts to ferment. All you need is the salt, and some things you don't even need to put an extra starter other than water because it has so many natural good bacteria in there. Another question. It depends what the question is, if you don't have a starter, can you just use salt and water? And does it just take longer? Some things will need a starter where other things won't. So imagine like plums on a tree. They have kind of that like, a little, oh, what do they look? They're not shiny. They kind of have a little bit of like grayish kind of stuff on there. That is called cam bacteria, and that's the natural bacteria. Something like that would have its natural starter. You wouldn't need to use anything else. Cabbage has enough of its own natural bacteria that you don't have to use anything else. The carrots, I think, would be best to put some kind of starter in there, whether it's just a little bit of whey from your yogurt or your kefir, or get a batch started. Start with something. Even if you buy, like, say, a jar of Bubby's pickles or something like that, that's going to introduce some new bacteria and start the fermentation process if you put a little bit of that in there. Okay, another question here. Okay, the question was about the last class with the chef that was talking. She mentioned a special salt that she really liked, and it was Diamond Kosher salt. Now, that is strictly for cooking. That probably has been through some type of refined process. I know what she's talking about. You definitely want to stick to probably one of the three that I talked about. I mean, there's other varieties within some of the Celtics, straight out of the sea, or straight, from the Himalayas, or even the Redmonds. They might have gone through some type of processing that would make it, I don't know, I'm not sure 100%, but I know for sure that if you stick with these three, you are going to have a good product. Cooking might be a little different. Somebody might know more than I do on that. Another question? Bob. There you go. Okay, so he was saying that he has a small crock, and once you take out a batch and you just rinse it out slightly, there's still enough good bacteria in there that you don't have to have anything else to start. And when I make my cabbage, I don't add anything else either, too, because it has enough stuff in there. And two, if you've got your environment where you're living, where you're doing it, there's bacteria in the air everywhere too. And so you get a lot of the good bacteria just from the air, except these are sealed, but the crocks, you would get that. Another question back there. You can, yes, you can. It depends, how clean it is, yes. And the soil bacteria are so beneficial too, and we don't eat enough dirt, in our lives these days, because the kids used to play outside all the time, and now everything's so sterile. We just need to be exposed to a little bit more of that. Is there any other questions? Yes. Fermenting with well water. That would work as long as you make sure that your well water is good. Yeah, that works. Next. Oh, that's a good question. So she was wondering about you're using raw milk from a farmer and you freeze the whey or the whatever or the milk because it's just to keep it. I looked into that, and the bacteria, a lot of them will survive the frozen temperature, and so you would probably have pretty good luck with that. You might not get such a broad spectrum, but you would be okay. Jill had a question. A resource for all the cool recipes. There's a lot in the hand. Did you get the handout? So a lot of these are kind of made up. You know what? Right when I was doing all of this stuff, there were no books out there. I had to order one from like Canada, and pay like $200 for it. But now there are, oh my gosh, everybody and their dog is writing about fermenting foods. There are so many good cookbooks and stuff out there right now, so you can find anything out there. Yes. Wild fermentation, there's so many. And even looking online, it's just become so popular. You can find a ton of recipes almost everywhere you look. Question. Oh, good question. Okay, so the question is, what's the shelf life of whey that you refrigerated? You'd be surprised. It keeps for years. If it's airtight, yes. Yes, it does. If you keep it in a small enough jar with not too much oxygen in there to break it down, it'll keep for a long, long time. Okay, so the question is, she did some sauerkraut, and how much would you use for a starter in the next batch? You really don't need to have for sauerkraut. For kraut is a little bit different than some of the other vegetables. You can just do it as is with a new batch, and it should be fine. You don't even have to, but you can. Oh, to use that for other stuff. Absolutely. Yes. If you wanted to use the sauerkraut, some of the liquid for another vegetables, absolutely. So it depends what size you're making, how much to use. So let's just say for the pint size, if you put a tablespoon, it'd be enough to keep going. Quarter cup for maybe a quart. It should be good. Okay. Anything else? Yes, Teresa. Good question. Yeah, so the question is, do I ever worry about bad bacteria, E. coli? With my biology, I always worry about bacteria. I think about bacteria a lot. So I don't so much worry about that. There's one slide that talks about the warning signs to watch out for. Like, the main thing is the smell. If it smells off, it's going to be putrid smelling. Okay, that's the main thing. We'll get to the warning signs on some of that. I think that most of the times, if it's bad, you're going to know it's bad. And even if you just smell it or you put a little bit in your mouth and it's like, ooh, that tastes off, then I haven't had a problem with it because I'm kind of particular when I'm putting my stuff together. But one of the people who took the class, the fermenting class last year, mentioned that they had a bad batch and they just knew it was bad and threw it out. Okay. Question here. Okay, so the question is, if you use a whey starter and you're lactose intolerant, then what? Well, if you're super lactose intolerant, I would probably be cautious at first which starter I use. I might find one of these that has some different types of things and some different strains of stuff, or find something that's really gentle. And then as you eat more fermented foods, your body will start becoming less and less lactose intolerant. A lot of times, however, if it's not like really serious, you can easily do the fermented foods with no problem because of the good bacteria. The lactose intolerance often happens because of pasteurization of milk and how it denatures the protein and that kind of thing. Becky, question. Oh, that's a good question. The question is, does it hold true for casein? So casein, some people are, they have casein, they don't do well with caseins, and so they have to avoid those. You know, I'm not 100% sure with that. I think maybe somebody who has that sensitivity may have to depend, you might watch where they're getting their source from, and watch that. So I'd have to investigate that to know for sure. Haven't run across that very much. You could use something else. It wouldn't have to be a whey base. It could be any other type of, fermentation. It's pretty interesting how fermentation, once you eat something fermented, and it's just so healing. One of the things that I've found is to be the most healing for people that are really compromised digestively is beet kvass, and I'm going to show you how to make that. How are we doing on time? I'm getting there. Okay, any other questions before we move on? Yes. Yes, so the question is, if you've never really fermented anything and you're not very familiar with it, are you really going to know that it's bad? You're going to know. It's going to be, you're not going to want anything to do with it. It's going to be off so much that you're going to know. That's why we have these lovely gift of the sense of taste and smell. We were given these things so we knew what to avoid. I think it's why we're so afraid of spiders and stuff too. I don't know. All of these innate things that we were given from our Creator really help us, guide us into what's safe and what's not safe. Okay. Another question. Okay. I can walk through the sauerkraut in a moment. We'll go through that next. Anything else? So this is your basic vegetable fermentation. Your carrot sticks, your cauliflower. You can totally be creative with that. Let's move to the next one. Here we go. One thing I do want to say is when you are fermenting something like this, have a catch tray. Put a plate underneath, a bowl or something like that, because it can fizz over and you don't want to totally ruin your woodwork or something like that. Okay, that's just a little tip. And then the other thing is keep it out of the sunlight, not direct sunlight. This picture was taken by a window, so I wouldn't keep my stuff here to ferment, even though the shade was pulling. You want to keep it in a cool place, out of the sun, direct sun, otherwise it'll ferment too fast. But once it's fully fermented, then you can refrigerate it. So these carrots, let's see, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 4 or 5 days to ferment something like this. They were sitting out. They've never been in the refrigerator yet. They've been sitting out on a counter. Now that they're fermented, I will store them in the refrigerator, and they can keep up to a year in quality, and they won't get bad. I think after a year, I have found that they do start to go down a little bit in quality. I used to have a full refrigerator in our basement just for my fermented foods when we had the kids at home and everything. And I ended up with some that were in there for a couple of years, and then I ended up, it wasn't quite as good as quality as I'd like it. So if you can use it within a year, by the time the next harvest comes around, you're going to be good. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Please note, make sure the contents get fizzy. If they don't fizz, you know that the fermentation really hasn't happened. And like if you shake it, you'll see little bubbles that'll start to form. And then you know that the fermentation process has happened and the lactobacilli did not properly ferment if you don't see that. And then the other thing is to really, look at it, smell it, and all of that. If you ever get a chance to ferment cauliflower with star anise and some cilantro, that's good stuff. Yeah. Question. Huh. I wonder how it would turn out. I've never tried that. So you're wondering, he's wondering, after a year, you haven't used it, you like the flavor, can you go ahead and can it? I don't know the answer to that. I think you would lose all your bacteria, but you might like the flavor. I don't know if it would still, how fresh it would stay. I mean, it wouldn't have that crunch anymore after the canning process. So, question way in the back. Okay, I think I heard the question. So you keep it outside on the out in the counter, the vegetables for 4 to 5 days. Sometimes fruits will get done a lot faster. Some things might take a lot longer. Sauerkraut will take longer. And then you want, like, if you've got like a root cellar or you've got some place to store it, like 45 degrees or cooler, that's great. You can store it down there. You don't need a refrigerator. But you do need to keep it 45 or less. Otherwise, it'll keep fermenting, and then it'll over ferment and it won't taste good. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anything else? I thought I saw one other question back here. Okay. So let's move on to the next thing. So let's go back one more. There, let's talk about oak leaves. All right, I bet you didn't know this, but you can add leaves into your fermentation things to provide tannins that help keep that crunch. And will give you added lactic acid bacteria. Oftentimes, these are some of the things I've used. I've used grape leaves, wild grape leaves. I've used oak leaves, raspberry leaves, horseradish leaves work great. You can use currant leaves, oak, apple. I've done apple leaves, blackberry leaves, mulberry leaves. So anytime you're adding something like that, you're going to get some more nutrients, some more medicinal properties, plus it's going to keep that crunch. To me, the crunch is really important. I love the crunchy texture, and then the fizz is really important to me for flavor. So keep that in mind. A lot of them are turning colors right now, but you can still use them. Question? From the tree. Okay, so the question is, if she's got an apple orchard, can she pick the leaves right now and dry them? Well, that's kind of what these bay leaves are. So certainly you would have the qualities there. You could do that, absolutely. And another question in the back. Okay, so the question is, wash everything, and then she hears that, some dirt is good. Where is this line between how much do I wash and how much do I clean? It's a good question. And there could be a lot of factors that come into play. It depends on your environment, how what's the bacteria? Make sure there's, no E. coli, no bad bacteria in the area. That everything is clean. I wouldn't use like bleach or anything like that. But I think a good scrubbing, I wouldn't go crazy on it. It's okay to have a little bit of that. I don't really have a black and white answer for you on that question, but, it's okay to get a little. Doesn't have to be perfectly clean. So, for the most part. Okay. All right. Let's look at the sauerkraut now. Next slide. So, with the sauerkraut, you can make a very classic with just the cabbage only, or you can get creative and add other veggies along with the herbs and spices. And actually, I don't know, I've come to really like my sauerkraut with a little bit of carrots, a lot of garlic, and some ginger root, usually. Sometimes I don't think I have ginger root in this one, but I love to add those ingredients with my kraut. Some people just like their kraut with caraway seeds. Some people like it with some juniper berries. Just find out figure out what it is that you like, or if you want to get some certain medicinal properties from some particular herb and add that in, you certainly can do that. And making different batches is always a good way to find out what you like best and what your family likes. So if you're doing the classic sauerkraut, here's a recipe, good kind of format to follow. It's a head of cabbage, a tablespoon of Celtic salt. Now the optional way, you don't have to put that in there, but if you want to add that in for additional bacteria, you can. And the caraway seed, I'm not a fan of caraway seed, but I know I grew up in a German family. And we always had the caraway seed in there, and I never liked it. So I never add it now. And then some people need to add water to the kraut, but very often you really, really don't have to. As you're pounding it, the natural juices come out. And then they just take you through the different steps. You peel off any older, discolored cabbage. Most experts recommend not rinsing the cabbage unless it has dirt on, because you can leave all the natural bacteria on there and they'll be good. Cut the cabbage into quarters, thinly slice it into 1/4 inch long strips, and then place it into a large bowl. Add salt, and then you can do it a bunch of different ways. But the way that I grew up doing it, my mother learned from her mother-in-law. Just going to put gloves on. So I went ahead and I cut some cabbage. This was from my garden from earlier that I had in the refrigerator. I saved the outside leaves. I'm going to roll that up and put that on top to keep it under the liquid. So here's just some shredded cabbage. I mean, if you want to buy a cabbage shredder and get it done faster, you certainly can. I don't like how it turns out if you do it in the food processor, so I like to either hand cut it or use a shredder. And then you add the salt to the cabbage, and I'm just going to go ahead. I didn't bring a measuring teaspoon or a tablespoon, so I'm just going to kind of guess here. Sometimes I taste it to see if I like the taste of the salt. Is it too salty or not enough? So the method that I learned was just mashing it with your hands. You're just essentially juicing it, getting the juices going. And this just speeds up the process. We'll be using the cabbage pounder, but really you want to get it going. Otherwise you'll sit there forever pounding. And usually I make big tubs of this. So it's hard to keep it in the little bowl all contained. But just to get going. Just to give you the idea. So you'd get it going with your hands, but you don't have to do it that way. So you put some in a jar. And you just, you keep mashing it down and you just get it to form liquid. Essentially, you're breaking up the cell walls of the plant and you're just juicing it. And I could sit here all night and do this, but I won't get into too much of the detail. But you get it in your jar, you get it to juice, and then pretty soon you're going to have all this cabbage that's packed into this jar really, really tight. And there's going to be a lot of natural juices that just form in there. And so you'd fill up the jar. You could also add, I brought some carrots and garlic. I'll add that to the jar and just mix it up and then stick it in there. And pack it down really tight. And again, keep it just at the lip. So there's some room for that expansion of all the carbon dioxide that's going to be released from the fermentation process. And then at the very end, what I would do is I would roll up. I'll clean up my mess on the floor. I'd just roll up a leaf and then just stick that on the top of the jar, and that way everything will stay under the liquid. Okay, hopefully I explained all that well. So if you decide you want to use the whey, you can add it right now, or you can add it to the jar before you fill it and close it all up. So the whey for cabbage is just like an added thing. You really don't have to, but you certainly can for more lactic acid bacteria. Do you get the whole process of how to stick it in the jar and pack it tight? Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next thing. Next slide are the salts we talked a little bit about. Here's the type of ratio that you're looking at. And that's always one of the things I think that was always the hardest for me when I was getting started is how much salt do I use? I would find some recipes that had a whole bunch and others that, didn't have enough. But the salt is really, really important to have in there because it's going to keep the bad bacteria out. And with that brine, basically I have found somewhere between 1 and 3 tablespoons per quart. So I typically do about 2 tablespoons per quart of kraut. I do like the salt, and the salt is really good for you. Like, for instance, the Celtic salt or any of those will have like 80 plus trace minerals that are really, really beneficial for you. So I do like adding that because I think you get a lot of good nutrition from it. Typically, the standard brine is 1 teaspoon of salt per cup of water. So basically, the more water content in the veggies, the more salt you need. So if it's not too much water content, you don't need as much. And then per pound wise, so use a heaping teaspoon per 1 pound of cabbage, or a tablespoon per 3 pounds. So those would be some guidelines for you, getting that flavor just right. And I always taste it before I put it in the jar, making sure that I like how the salt taste is. If it's too much, then I'll add a little more cabbage and make a few more jars. And if it's not enough, then I'll put some more in. So that's my guideline that I recommend. And then in the next slide, I just want to mention how you can be really creative with other vegetables to ferment. I fermented asparagus, Green beans are really good. The one thing with the green beans, and I did a lot of research on this, because I did some where I just put them in raw, and then I found other things where people said you had to cook them a little bit. Ultimately, the bottom line is if you parboil them or just barely flash cook them, the green beans, I can't think of what, there's some chemical in there. It's better if you cook them just barely before you ferment them, and they're really yummy. You can make dilly green beans, you can add any seasoning, and you can really pack them in the jar really good, and they're just really delicious to have as a snack. Then you can do beets, and I think we're going to go through the kvass recipe. Or you can do broccoli, other cabbages. Purple cabbage is great. It takes longer to ferment slightly than the green. Carrots, cauliflower, celery, cucumbers, which is pickles. You guys have to taste this. This happens to be a boughten one, but I've made a ton of other cucumbers. I just didn't have any ready to go right now. Daikon radishes are really great. Eggplant, that doesn't turn out, in my opinion, the best. Fennel's good. Fiddlehead ferns, that's really a fun one to do. We have kale, kohlrabi, leeks, lovage, okra, onions, peppers, rutabagas, squash, tomatoes, turnips, zucchini, anything. Be creative, really. Come up with whatever you like, whatever you're growing that you need to preserve. Think about trying it as a fermented food. And the next slide, some information to know about temperatures. So you really want to ferment your stuff at somewhere between 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Make sure that you have the right room temperature. Make sure it's a fermentation isn't too high. Make it slow enough so that you can get all the complex flavors and retain your crisp texture. If you do it too fast, then it'll change kind of the consistency. But you want to make sure that you do it fast enough as well. So if you do it too slow and the temperature is too cold and it doesn't ferment within 2 to 6 weeks, that doesn't turn out as good either because you're going to lose some salt in the process. So I recommend 60 to 70 degrees, probably not over 70 for the most part. That causes the fermentation to happen too fast. The bacteria feed on pectin and are more active, causing the vegetables to break down into softer textures. The flavor is sharper rather than tangy. Since the water will evaporate faster, you may have to watch the level of brine in the vessel. Also note, when moved to cold storage, these ferments have a shorter shelf life. So if they are fermented at a little too high temperature, they won't keep as long as well. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And these are some of the warning signs or processing problems that you may encounter. With culturing and fermenting foods, knowledge comes with experience. The smell test is very reliable, and your nose will detect if it is safe to eat. The aroma and taste will indicate whether or not the fermentation was successful. Successful fermentations have a distinguishing, pleasant smell. The taste is slightly sour but pleasing. Now, if you are really kind of unsure and you need some extra help, you can use some litmus paper to test its pH, and it should be below 4.1. Once in a while, there might be some mold or some harmless calm yeast that shows up on the top. For the most part, it's just like a little bacteria or some spore or something got in there, and it just is confined to one area. And you can just strain that off. Now, the calm yeast shows up a lot more on the beet kvass. It's kind of just like a little white stuff floating over the top, and that's perfectly harmless. The calm yeast is naturally on like those plums that I was describing. It just is in the natural environment. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide, and we'll take a look at this beet kvass recipe. So the beet kvass is, if you like beets, salty beets, you're going to like beet kvass. You don't really use it for the flavor so much. You use it for its medicinal purposes, and it really does a lot of gut healing. There actually is, some people have a special gene that to them, beets taste like dirt. No matter what they do, they hate them. And some people love beets and some people hate beets. And it's all because you have a particular gene. And within my family, both of my daughters just think beets are the worst thing in the world. So I don't know where they inherited that gene, but it wasn't from me. But anyway, so if you make beet kvass, it's really, really simple. And this is a Russian recipe, and it's been used all over the world for centuries, many, many centuries, thousands of years actually. So I'm going to meander over here. So earlier today, I pulled out a couple beets from the garden. There's just 2 of them. And I peeled them and then chopped them up. And so that's what I have in this jar. Okay. And I have tried beet kvass without peeling it, and it gives the beet kvass a little bitter flavor. So I really like to peel the beets. And then all you do is you add your salt, and it's a tablespoon that it's calling for. So I'm going to just estimate because I didn't bring a measuring thing. That's pretty good. And then you add your filtered water. It's 3 ingredients. You can also add the whey. But I might go home and add a little bit of whey just so that it ferments just a wee bit better. And then you're going to want to, I have my little pickle pipe here. If you do fermentation, a lot of times you're going to note that like the acidity will make your lids get rusty. So it's nice to use something like that. Give it a good shake, and it'll sit out on the counter for 3 or 4 days. I'll taste it like the 3rd or 4th day and see if I like if the fermentation is enough. If it's not quite enough, I'll let it ferment another day or 2. A lot of factors come into play: temperature, bacteria in the air, all of that kind of thing. And all of the instructions are right there for you. So I did bring some kvass that you can taste. Well, I know what I'm going to do. Since I didn't bring any whey, I'm going to add a little starter culture from this commercial product. I must say, this brand, Oregon Brine Works, made out of Oregon, and I get this from Azure Standard. Oh my goodness, this has got to be the best company for quality of fermented foods. I love their pickles, I love their kraut, I love their kvass. Oregon Brine Works. So I brought some of that along so that you could taste it, so you could get a feel for what a fermented pickle tastes like, so you could taste what the beet kvass tastes like, and then we will have the kraut that I made with garlic and carrots. I don't think ginger's in that one. And then we'll try different types of carrots. So what I think I'll do is I can plate them up and you guys can try different samples of all of that. Any other questions that you have so far? Okay, and I'll just, yes, there are more questions. Okay. Okay, so the question with the sauerkraut is how long does that take? Well, it'll vary. That will take at least 2 weeks. Okay, the kraut will take longer. It's packed tighter, for one thing. And there's different methods, especially if you do like, you have it in a crock. It'll really vary. And what you need to do with the sauerkraut is you'll start to smell it, that it's going on in your house. That's happening. And then just taste a little bit. See if it's got the crunch you like. See if it's got the flavor, or does it just taste like salty cabbage? You can open the jar anytime you want. You're going to lose a little of the carbon dioxide, but that's okay. You can start tasting it to experiment and see what you want to do. And it doesn't have to be in jars. You can do other methods too, but jars just are so easy. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. So the question was, when I soak my oatmeal to get rid of the phytic acid, do I cook it like usual? Oh, rinse it. No, I don't rinse it. What I do, okay, when I'm soaking the oatmeal and it's got that liquid in there, usually by morning it's probably absorbed most of the water. And I just put the whole thing in a pan, crank up the burner, and cook it. Sometimes you may have to add a wee bit more water. I never rinse it. So you're getting it's all there, all of the good, little process that's turned overnight, which isn't a lot, but it's enough to get rid of, the nutrient inhibitors. Question over here. Sure, you could. I mean, because it would be like kind of like making, I suppose, yogurt type thing. Yeah, as long as it's like a raw milk type or something like that. Does the microwave kill any bacteria? Yes, the microwave would definitely kill bacteria. The heat will kill bacteria. I actually threw out my microwave back in 2000. Haven't had one in the house since. Don't ever use one. It's up to you. I mean, do a little research. Everyone needs to make up their own mind, but it just changes how the food is. Some people need it for convenience, and it's real important. I had heard and studied and found out that, man, I don't know, maybe this microwave's not so great. And I decided, well, can I live without it? And I just got rid of it, and I don't miss it at all. You can heat stuff up really, really fast. Am I the only one without a microwave? Oh, soften butter? Oh, I have a little cast iron pan that, you fry eggs in and stuff. I just turn the burner on and, it gets a little more than soft sometimes, but that's okay. It still works. Yeah. Question in the back. Okay, can you repeat that one more time? I didn't quite hear you. Yeah, you can use a tight fitting lid. You want to tighten this all the way because you want to reduce the amount of oxygen that's coming in. And how this pickle topper thing was created, it closes up unless it's forced open. And so the bacteria really won't come in from the inside and you're not bringing the oxygen in. So you don't need a fancy pickle topper. They didn't even create those things until the last, 10 years, I just always used that and it worked fine. And before I did that, my grandmother always used a crock pot or a crock. And I know crocks are great. I just don't have one. So, question over here. Okay, so the question was, she typically makes her sauerkraut the method that I showed you, the massaging, and she finds that it dries out after a little bit and then gets more dry than you like. And can you add a little brine later? Absolutely, yeah. You could add more brine if you needed to. It just might take a little bit longer to ferment. Um, I've had more problems with too much liquid than anything bubbling out, So I always make sure that I have my kraut in, we have these big meat tubs, lugs, and I put it in, a tub like that for any seepage, because I tend to find that happens more often for me than not. Okay, any other questions about the fermentation? Yes. For the kraut? Okay. Yeah, the question is, so he makes 25 pounds of kraut at a time and you stick it in the freezer then. You will reduce some of the bacteria in the freezing process. You might change the texture too. With this, it has a nice crispness to it rather than a sogginess, because if it were frozen, it would get softer and more limp. So I guess you could certainly, if you have like a root cellar or some place where it can maintain like 45 degrees or below, you could do that. You could freeze it. You are going to lose a little something with it. I do recommend not heating sauerkraut when you eat it, even though it's great on Reubens. You can do that. That's an exception to the rule. But yeah, you want to not heat it because that will kill some of the bacteria. So you want to have it, as close to that temperature as possible. Okay. All right.
Real quick before we move on to the next thing. So just a few things. Abby Barberg with Victory Produce, if you don't have like a lot of leftover produce from your garden, she just put out a bulk order form for carrots, beets, radishes, cabbage, so a lot of this kind of stuff. So, and it's like you get, like 25 pounds of whatever type of vegetable you want. So I just wanted to mention that Victory Produce, you can look it up. And then also Connie will be at that event on the 14th of November for the Sustainable Gifts and Gatherings. So you can come and talk to her more then too. And then as well as Dan and Becky's will be there too. And and Connie teaches all sorts of great classes. So I encourage you to just kind of watch for those. And I just want to thank you too for sharing all this wonderful information and opening our eyes up to like so many possibilities. So it's really, really wonderful. So thank you for doing this again. So I'll let you.
Okay. And thank you. Thank you. And so let's kind of wrap up things with the next couple slides here. So as she mentioned, I do teach a lot of classes and we have a lot of educational things happening at the Lamb Shoppe Wellness Center. If anybody wants to get on our mailing list, I did bring that an email sheet here. Please sign up for that. And I brought some business cards. Recognize yourself, Tasha. So these are some of the previous classes of home herbalists that we have. It's a 9-month course. You learn how to use the weeds and things around you and utilize them. So there's some pictures. It is such a fun class to teach. It is life-changing. You'll never look at plants the same way again. Okay, and so in the next slide, we have, let's see, the next one is, what did I do? The next one just has some of the card sets that I've written, and these are, I did one on garden medicine. It's got all the healing properties. There's 25 different things you can grow in the garden and how to use them. I have a set on how to make all the different preparations. Nature's medicine, which is 45 different plants growing in your backyard, everything from like dandelion to chickweed and creeping Charlie. And then a set on wild edibles. And that brings us to the last slide, which we've taken the questions as we're going, which is the way I love it. That way, otherwise, if you put them to the end, you forget about them and you just don't get as much out of it. So I will serve up some of these products here, and you guys can come and taste them. Thank you.